You are listening to another episode of the Coaster101 podcast. I'm Andrew Stillwell, and I am joined this week. We've got a very, very special guest. He is a long-time industry veteran. He is a former general manager of Kings Island, former general manager of Kings Dominion, a former IAPA president, and in 1956 was named, I need to get this right, All-American Boy by Pageant Magazine. We've got a very special guest. Dennis Speigel is joining us on the podcast today. Dennis, welcome to the Coaster101 podcast.
Hey, Andrew, how are you? Glad to be here.
I'm great. I just, we've got this opportunity to interview you, and I was doing a little research. Your career in the industry is, to me, just insane in the best way possible. I mean, you've been everywhere, you've done everything. But for those who don't necessarily know or recognize the name Dennis Speigel, first of all, shame on you. Second of all, for those who may or may not know the name, what can you tell us about yourself? What can you tell us about Dennis Speigel?
Well, Dennis Speigel has been a lifelong servant of the amusement and theme park industry. I started when I was actually 13 years old at Coney Island here in Cincinnati, not to be confused with Coney Island of New York. And incidentally, Coney Island, Cincinnati was the park that Walt Disney visited many, many times to get ideas for Disneyland back in the early 50s. I started there as an admissions gate ticket taker in junior high school and fell in love with the business. And I literally worked there, Andrew, from junior high through high school and on through college. And happened to be at the right place at the right time when Taft Broadcasting Company, which owned the Hanna-Barbera Studios, which is Fred Flintstone and Yogi Bear and Scooby-Doo and all those wonderful characters, was looking for a way to exploit their characters that they had bought. And they went out to California and met with Roy Disney. Walt Disney had just passed about a year earlier. And they said, how could we get into this business and kind of take a page from your book? And Roy Disney said, interestingly enough, when Walt and I were looking to get into the amusement park business, we came to Cincinnati, met with Coney Island, and you ought to go back and talk to them. And we did. We all met, and the deal went down in about 6 months. So that started my career in the amusement and theme park business. And 60 years later, we're still doing it.
I love it. I've got to ask, though, you mentioned you started your career at Coney Island. And recently, as we all know, they announced that they were closing for good. I want to kind of get your thoughts on that news and kind of, again, as an industry veteran, the trends, the ebbs and flows of the amusement industry. What do you think it was that was kind of the I don't want to say the nail in the coffin because that's kind of dark and disturbing. But, what do you think it was with Coney Island that kind of saw it close for good? Was it cannibalization in the market by Kings Island? Was it the decision to go water park only? Was it COVID? I mean, was it a combination of kind of all of that? What are your thoughts there?
Well, timing came into play here. I mean, Coney Island was over 135 years old, and it had shrunken down from an amusement park to a operating swimming pool with a few rides. And about 5 years ago, the owners decided to take the rides out of the park because two reasons. They're very expensive to buy, keep up with, and two, very expensive to maintain. So they made the decision to shrink the Coney Island product to just the swimming pool. And what it really became was a community swim club, if you will, in the greater Cincinnati area and northern Kentucky area for those people living in Anderson, Mount Washington, around the area, 10, 15, 20 miles out. And you're at the will of the weather, of course. And if you have a great hot season, you do well. But you can have a couple of great hot weather seasons and do well with the pool. And then you can have a flood in the winter that comes in and wipes that out because you have to come in and clean it out and spend all the money. So it became a very difficult issue to deal with, floods, and the market was shrinking after the rides went away. So it it came as a surprise to everybody in Cincinnati, including me. I didn't know it was going to be sold, but we'll see how this plays out. There are still people down there in front of it picketing, and we'll be there this weekend to try to save it. So we'll
Oh,
see.
I love it. Well, I mean, I think it's turning into a music venue. It's still kind of in the entertainment space, but yeah, I'm not a Cincinnati local. I can't say I've ever been to Coney Island, but I was sad to see it close because it's always sad to see, a
Sure.
place, water park like that, or former amusement park, anything like that close. But
Yeah. Well, that's where my career was born. So I'm sad about it, but it's business, and it isn't supported by government or public funding. It's it's two business people coming together and saying onward and upward. Let's create something new, bigger and better in the future. We're hoping that they keep some of the edifices that's there, such as the beautiful front gate building and possibly Moonlight Gardens. But still, that's all up for grabs, and we'll find out here as it unfolds over the next few months.
perfect. Well, okay. And we've gotten this out of the way. I had to ask. I know you started there all those years ago. I just was curious. But going back, you did mention that you went from Coney Island to Kings Island, kind of a right place, right time, as Taft Broadcasting was building the park in the late '60s, early '70s, however long that construction process was. I want to talk about some of that earlier work you had, specifically with Kings Island and Kings Dominion, and then eventually working on kind of the development of Canada's Wonderland. Um, what was it like for you to kind of be on the ground in the development stages? I mean, especially in today's day and age, we don't get a lot of new parks like we're coming up in the '60s and '70s. What was most memorable for you, kind of being in those early developments, and again, being there, seeing these places open and coming up, from the ground up in Cincinnati and the greater Richmond area.
Well, I think first I should say if we knew then what we know now, we probably wouldn't have done it. It was just such a major undertaking. The process was led by uh, uh, Gary Shot Wachs, whose family was half owner of Coney Island. It was the Shot Wachs family. Gary was a young man. He was in his early 20s, mid 20s. He's actually the person that hired me from the front gate to come into management and train me to work at Kings Island, take over Kings Dominion, and work on Canada's Wonderland. Gary was the father of Kings Island. Actually, he's the father of the renaissance of the roller coaster, which happened. Well, I'm sure we're going to talk about later with the racer. But Gary, he was full of excitement. He saw the challenge of remain. If we wanted to remain in business in Cincinnati, that we had to grow and we had to move on and get out of the floodplain of Coney Island. And that's when we went 26 more miles north up to Kings Mills, Ohio,
Mhm.
and bought that property up there, which at a whopping $1,500 an acre back then. So you should have bought another 50,000 acres at that price. But it was an exciting time because we were Andrew, we were all young. We were we had a lot of ideas. We had a lot of we had studied the industry and followed Gary Wach's lead, and we were making the right decisions. Then, really, we were putting in the right attractions. We were laying it out correctly. We were fortunate to have Taft Broadcasting supporting us from a financial standpoint. Dudley Taft, who was the son of the founder of Taft Broadcasting, was very involved in the project. And again, everybody was under 30 years old. So, I mean, you think about it, here we were building one of the most successful theme parks, even today, in the industry at those young ages. It was just very exciting. And it was, we didn't let anything hold us back or stop us.
Yeah, and then that's again, it's just crazy to think about how, again, the world was a different time in the this early '70s, but you've got this team of sub 30 or 30-year-old, the guys in their 30s, in their 20s,
Yeah.
just building and kind of coming up with this again, what is now still considered one of the world's greatest theme parks.
Well,
So
here's the greatest departure we made. Under Gary Walks, we made the decision to design and build Kings Island in house. Up to that point in time, the two Six Flags parks and a few of the other parks that had developed out in California and were on the drawing boards were being designed by the Randall Dual Company out of California. And Randall Dual copied the hub and spoke concept that Walt Disney, of course, made famous. And the Dual Company, worked on that park as well. But we said, let's do it in house. We've got the talent here locally that we could do, and we created this plethora of people and talent to do all of that design in house. And we not only did Kings Island, we did Kings Dominion and Canada's Wonderland basically the same way. So we trained our in-house talent like Dennis Speigel and the others who were part of that team to learn about the theme park business and be creative and go out and see and explore and bring back ideas. And that's what we did. And that's how we developed Kings Island.
and at that point, like you mentioned, there weren't a ton of theme parks out there. Where were you pulling your inspiration from?
Well, I'll tell you, Six Flags was very good to us at that point in time. Some of the key guys with Six Flags, Errol McCoy, uh, uh, Larry Cochran, Bruce Jewell. These were the people, Bill Crandall, these were the people at Six Flags who were running those two parks, Texas and Georgia. And they allowed us to come in and look at the parks and literally measure some of the facilities like the personnel and the laundries and things like that. So we drew a lot of inspiration and information from Six Flags. And I'll tell you, if we have time in today's story, I can tell you how we came back and helped them later on and paid them back for that. But that's where we drew a lot of it. And of course, we were going to Disney and looking at it just like Disney came to us to get ideas. And we were meeting with all the manufacturers out on the West Coast. These were all new relationships that were developing and happening at that time. From costume designers to the ride manufacturers. We were going to Europe and meeting with Intamin and the companies like that built the Eiffel Tower and the oil derrick at Six Flags. And so we were establishing relationships that actually exist till today.
I love it. It is great. And Kings Island opened in 1972, and then Kings Dominion opened in 1976. And I know you kind of
Yeah.
shifted focus. You were at Kings Island, then you were I believe, the youngest general manager in Kings or in the industry at that time. I
Yeah,
believe it's the
I was 26 and I was general manager. What we did was, I should tell you, when we moved from Coney Island to Kings Island, while Kings Island was under design and construction, we continued to operate Coney Island for 2 years, 70 and 71, closed it down on Labor Day of 71 and then moved up to Kings Island. But what we did was Gary Walks took the team and he cut it in half. So there were about 16 to 20 of us at that time, full time, and a lot of support people also. But half of us stayed at Coney and operated. Half of us went to Kings Island and started planning and working and developing. And then the same thing occurred when we were ready to move to Kings Dominion. Half of us stayed at Kings Island, and the other half went down to Kings Dominion in Richmond, Virginia, and we started planning and designing down there. I stayed at Kings Island the first two and a half years and went back and forth that third year, 3 days in Cincinnati, 3 days in Richmond, and 1 day on an airplane. So I worked that whole summer, and we all did like that, planning, and we didn't care. We were young and could do that. But that's how we kind of moved and brought the expertise to those additional parks. And then we did the same thing up at Canada's Wonderland when we built it. So we had that internal inherent team of really executives now who could run these parks, design them, plan them, and make them right.
I love that. So I read something. I was doing a little research before we started talking. When you were general manager at Kings Dominion, um, the employees or um, team members, whatever the vernacular was at that time, they would see you coming and they would have you on the radio. So
Yeah.
the way you were able to sneak around the park was hopping in the Hanna-Barbera costumes and
Yeah.
kind of observing as Fred Flintstone or Yogi Bear or something like that. What do you remember, other than those costumes probably being ungodly hot? What do you remember most about that? Being
And
able to.
also, Andrew, they were ungodly smelly. Okay. But well, the reason I did that, that's exactly what would happen. I'd go out in the park, and we all were wired with two-way radios, and they'd say, Spiegel's coming down Candy Apple Mall. Now he's over in Hanna-Barbera land. And you couldn't sneak up on anybody. So I said to our character team one day, and one of our supervisors, I'm going to get in Yogi Bear or Scooby Doo, whoever it was, and I'm going to go out in the park, and they won't know who I am. Of course, I'm not thinking it's about 130 degrees in this costume, but I'd go out and walk around, and I got a different perspective of the park, not a bad one, but a different one, because they didn't know I was out in the park. And one day I got out there, and it really was about 95 degrees temperature, and I was starting to suffocate. And we had a rule back then: if you're in the character costume and you pass out, don't take your head off out in front of the people. Let us get you behind the fences back in Never Land where nobody can see you. And I've got my head up, and I'm going. I'm trying to breathe. I said, "Get me out of here." That was about the last time I did that.
Okay, probably for good reason.
Yeah, good reason.
I love that story, and it's just like I saw that, I was like, I gotta ask him. I gotta ask him that question. Um, what do you think between Kings Island on to Kings Dominion and then on to planning for Canada's Wonderland? What do you think were some of the biggest like learning points, or what did you learn between Park A, Park B, and then on to Park C? How did you kind of learn as you went?
Well, we learned a lot, and we got a lot of it right, but we got some things wrong as well. And I'll tell you, one of the major things we got wrong at Kings Dominion, having done Kings Island, if you've been to Kings Island, you come in International Street, and it has two cut throughs through the middle of the buildings where you circulate around through the parks. So you just it's very easy to move through Kings Island and keep flowing. In Kings Dominion, before I got down there, the International Street was designed basically as a pipe stem, and there were no cut throughs. So what happened was the people came in the park, and they would move through International Street, go back into the depths of the park, and they really wouldn't come up to International Street, where the bulk of our merchandise and a lot of our food service was, until late in the afternoon. So before I left down there as GM, I took the side streets where we could, and I opened them up and put some rides on both sides of the street to promote circulation and people coming back up to the street. And the other thing we should have done differently at Kings Dominion, besides the design of International Street, is we should have shifted the axis, not access, axis of the park to the northeast, or I'm sorry, the south east, because that's where the bulk of the trees were in the shade. And when we opened that park, Kings Dominion, it didn't have a lot of shade, and we were competing with. It took me 20 years to be able to say this, but the most beautiful park in the industry, Busch Gardens, down in Williamsburg, which was nestled in this wonderful treed and it had creeks and beautiful landscaping, natural, and people were very comfortable there. So we had to establish a long range plan at Kings Dominion, and we started planting 5,000 trees a year the first 4 or 5 years. If you go to Kings Dominion today, you can see the residual of that. But in the beginning, we should have changed it, and we should have changed the pipe stem. So when we went to Canada's Wonderland, we did that. We opened that up. We actually changed the end of International Street. We kept International Street as it was at the two other parks, but we put in a mountain. And that mountain was a cooling tower, so it was very efficient from the standpoint of operating the park and everything, and gave it a beautiful look. And of course, Canada Wonderland is one of the most beautiful parks too in North America. So um, we got that right, but you fine tune things and you learn as you go through. We were moving rapidly because there was a lot of development happening at that point in time by other operators.
Right. I love that. Well, again, this is so we've made it to, 1983. You've been in the industry at this point, you know, 10, 15, 20 years. And you decide, you've been at Taft Broadcasting for a while, you've worked in the parks. You start your own company, International Theme Park Services, in 1983. What was your decision to kind of get out of the park itself and into more of a consulting role?
Well, in 1980, like big companies do, and who are growing and maturing, they shuffled the deck of cards and they moved us around. Some people left the company. Some people moved to different parks. They brought me out of the parks back to corporate. I'd always been in a park my whole life. So now I'm back in a corporate office in the ivory tower, if you will. Is boring as hell. I hated it. And the but I was helping the new head of the park group at that time with teaching him the business because he really hadn't been in the business. And I did that for about two years, and it really was boring. And they they made me. That's right when Disney was opening Tokyo,
Mm-hmm.
and that was such a huge success. So people started coming to Taft Broadcasting Company because of Hanna Barbera and what we had opened, the parks we'd opened so successfully. And keep in mind too, we had bought Carowinds back then, so
Yep.
we had that operating. And they were saying, "Look, we'll give you $250,000 to consult with us. We'd like you to invest. We'd like for you to advise. What will it take?" And Taft was still heavily steeped in the broadcasting business at that point in time, in the movie and cartoon business. The parks hadn't come into vogue yet. They would a couple of years later. And I always said, and I had this stack of projects on my desk, and to Taft, it was just like crumbs on a desk. But if you knock those crumbs on the floor, it became a banquet to the mouse, and I was the mouse. And I said, it's time for me to go. I wasn't being utilized properly the way I wanted to be. I was bored, and I had always heard if you're going to open your own company, you ought to do it before you're 40. So I stepped out, opened International Theme Park Services in 1983. There was a group who had come to Taft who wanted their services, but they really wanted to hire me and have me run their company. So they asked me if I would do that, and I said, "Yeah." That was my stepping stone, and I continued to work with them for 4 or 5 years as a client. But when we left and started ITPS, we hit the ground running, Andrew, and we have projects starting to stack up, and we kept expanding and adding to the group and adding to it. At one time, we were at 82 people, uh, but that was during the boom time of theme park development, 80s and early 90s. So that's why I started ITPS, and we still remain busy till this day in 2024. It's kind of crazy. I said to our staff when we started, there's enough business out there to keep us busy for 20 years. Well, it's 41 years now, and we're still busy. And we just can't tell you where, but we just secured a new project 2 days ago, uh, which will keep us busy for another couple of years.
I love that. If you look at kind of the resume of ITPS, you see parks like Parc Astrix in Paris, and you see the Six Flags chain working with their holiday event, and Lotte World in South Korea, and you Kennywood is on here, Parque Reunidos, all these parks around the world. I mean, you've had just this global impact with ITPS, which is really really cool to see. I do want to ask, it this is probably a very very loaded question at this point. 41 years of having your own kind of theme park consultancy group. what do you think are some of the biggest or most impactful changes or trend shifts that you've seen in the industry in the past 40 years?
Well, it's gone from a mom and pop company or industry. When we first got in, like Coney Island, it was owned by families, and then you saw the tap broadcastings come in, and you saw the Penn Centrals buy Six Flags from Angus Wynn. So you saw the industry start to shift from the families who started amusement parks to larger companies, and then it shifted into the big entertainment companies, Paramount, Time Warner, and all of these types of companies were coming in. They were looking for ways to exploit their IP in the parks, which they have done through the years. The
Mm-hmm.
DC characters, Batman, Superman, Back to the Future, all of these types of famous films came into the theme park business. So that was one big shift. The other thing that I've seen that has just never stopped is the advancement of technology and what it's allowed us to do in our industry to entertain and serve the guest. The technological advancements from 1970 to 2024, we couldn't have imagined them. Of course, with AI and holograms and everything that's coming on. Even you look back the Spider-Man ride, what a fantastic ride that still is today. You look at the Back to the Future ride when it was introduced in 1991 by Universal.
Mm-hmm.
That was such a success. It even surprised Universal. It was the first time that Universal Studios ever out Disneyed Disney with a ride attraction. It was that successful and enormous. It just eclipsed everything else in the industry. So we've seen those kind of advancements, and now we've seen as we've aged and mature, and we are a mature industry. We've seen the globalization of the industry, and we've seen it spread into these areas that we never thought it would. My company, ITPS, we were kind of like a metronome. We were always the first in the markets. We were the first to enter into China. We were the first American theme park company in China. We managed Beijing Amusement Park for over 10 years. And that opened the doors for the Chinese amusement park operators and manufacturers because we helped them set up Kappa. I was on their board of directors and helped them develop their industry. So you've seen that go from zero to what it is today. They're building parks on par with Disney and Universal now. Chairman Su over in Guangzhou with Chimelong, OCT, Fana Wild. Those are wonderful operations. So that's the kind of stuff we've seen. Now we're seeing it over in the Middle East, and it's a little crazier over there right now, but it's happening. There's a lot of money being spent, literally hundreds of billions.
Yes. We've seen it, and it's coming down the pipeline very quickly. And I think, before we know it, it'll be this new kind of theme park hot. For a while, obviously, it was the Orlando parks. Then it was like, okay, we're going to do things in Dubai, and all these Dubai parks popped up now, and in Saudi with Six Flags and all these other places.
Yeah.
It is definitely a boom right now for sure. I want to transition a little bit though, because at our core, we are a roller coaster podcast, and we are just about half an hour into our chat right now. And we've yet to talk about roller coasters. So shame on me. I apologize to the audience, but you know what? The history lesson and learning more about you, that's worth the price of admission to this podcast, which I love. So thank you for telling me your story and all the story of ITPS. I could sit here and listen to this for hours. So we might have to have you back on at a future day just to keep
Yeah, we'll
going.
do it again too.
But roller coasters. You talked real quick. Gary Walks at Kings Island was kind of the wooden coaster renaissance when the Racer opened.
Yeah.
Why do you personally feel that the Racer is such an influential coaster?
Well, when we built Kings Island, we were planning it. We were watching Disney and Six Flags at that time. Both companies felt that the coaster was passe and carny and was beneath their dignity, truly.
Hmm.
So you didn't see any coasters at Disney, really, so to speak, and you didn't see anything at Six Flags at that point in time. We had had the wonderful success of the Shooting Star and the Wildcat and the Teddy Bear at Coney Island, and we knew that legacy and how popular they were with the public that came to our park. Over 1 million a year loved those rides at Coney Island. So we had a group internally that we came up with the idea, and Gary Walks wanted to put this roller coaster in, and he coaxed John Allen, the great Philadelphia toboggan designer, to come out of retirement and design the racing coaster on a slide rule. We didn't have computers and things there. And because we knew it would be a success, started out as a one-sided coaster and evolved into the racing coaster, the two sides, the red and the blue train side. And that coaster was really the first major coaster that had been built since the late 40s. I think Kennywood had done something, but there really wasn't any major new roller coasters happening at that point in time with the parks that were developing. So that was the Renaissance. So I'll never forget the story when Errol McCoy, who was had been so kind to us in Six Flags, helping us, he came up to visit Kings Island. Gary Walks took him on a tour down Coney Island Mall, and this line went all the way down Coney Island Mall, about a quarter of a mile through the park, back around to several areas. And Errol said, "What in the world is that line to?" And Gary said, "Come on, I'll show you." And he took him up, and this was the cue to the racer. And from that standpoint, Six Flags got it and understood. Now, I said earlier there was payback to Six Flags. So Six Flags, Errol wanted to put some coasters in the park, and we were happy to help him. And we gave him some of our team members, Jim Figley and a few other people who were very instrumental in building the racer and some of the other coasters in the park. And we helped them build the Great American Scream Machine, gave them some ideas and grounding and foundation work as payback for their help in getting us started at KI. So
I love
that was the Renaissance. That's what birthed all these coasters. And since then, Andrew, there are literally several thousand coasters been developed.
Absolutely. And our audience, again, big coaster people, as coaster enthusiasts, we count coaster credits. And I've got a debate right now. And former Kings Island communications manager Don Helbig.
Yep.
Don, great guy, love him. He swears up and down that the racer counts as one roller coaster. I need to know your thoughts. Is the racer, if you ride both sides, is it one roller coaster or is it two roller coasters?
Yes.
Okay. That is the best non-answer I will ever get, and we're gonna move on to the next question.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. That is great. I love that so much. I've got to ask: Are you still? I mean, being in the business as long as you have, are you still riding coasters? Do you have are you riding it all these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't like to do the loops anymore, and I don't like to go around in the circles. But I just had lunch with Mike Kuntz, who invited me to come out in May to speak at the ACE convention that's going to be held at Kings Island for several days. Told him I'd be happy to come back and tell some stories about the rides, and I told him I can't wait for it to open, the park to open, because I want to ride the Beast again. I mean, the Beast to me is still the best. It was an amazing coaster when we opened it, and it remains an amazing coaster to this very day. So yeah, I still ride them. I just don't. I don't like the. I can do the ups and downs and the whoop-de-doos. I just don't want to do the loops.
Got it. Okay, cool. I love, again, it's cool to me that, again, you know the classics. You respect the classics. Obviously, the Beast has been there, since 1979. Still to this day has the record for the longest wooden roller coaster. That it broke its own record a couple years ago when they retracked it. So
Yeah,
by 3 feet or so. I just what do you think? And I know there's a documentary right now that's on VeryLocal, which is a streaming service available, I think, anywhere you can have like a smart TV. There's a documentary that came out that was the Roller Coaster Wars that birthed the Beast.
Yeah.
You play a very prominent role in this documentary. Where do you see Kings Island is kind of its role in the greater Coaster Wars? I mean, again, you mentioned that the Taft Broadcasting folks helped. After the racer opened, you helped Six Flags. Then Six Flags, they got all their parks, Magic Mountain and Six Flags Fiesta Texas, all these coaster parks. They started popping up, and the building these EST coasters.
Yep.
With Kings Island specifically, do you feel like the Beast and the Racer kind of kicked off those coaster wars of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, I look upon two things. Gary Walks is the father of the renaissance of the wooden roller coaster, and Kings Island is the mother of the renaissance of the wooden roller coaster with the Racer and Scooby Doo back then is what we
Mm-hmm.
called it, and that's what launched all. I mean, Andrew, people came in literally from all over the world to see those rides
Mm-hmm.
and experience them. From Blackpool Pleasure Beach to I took people around from that came that I had no idea where they were coming from back at that time in 1970, but just to see our park. So yeah, Kings Island played that major role in birthing the rebirth of the roller coaster, and it hasn't stopped since. The the thing that was interesting in the documentary that you're talking about was the Son of Beast. And this is a classic example of not getting it right. We talked about at the onset of the podcast here. It was just too big. And this was a classic case of bigger was not better. And there were errors in the way it was constructed and built and designed and fabricated. And it was hurting people. I mean, it's general knowledge. And uh, the right to a lot of money was pumped into it to try to save it and make it correct, but it just couldn't be done. And Cedar Fair at that point in time, I believe it was Cedar Fair. Yeah, they had bought it from Paramount. They made the decision to destroy it and take it down, and that was a huge decision because that was tens of millions of dollars to build it and then to try to get it right that was taken down, but it was the right decision. So, from a standpoint of the guest and the industry, um, it was a great attempt. I love to tell the story. I named the Son of Beast. I went to him. I was going to build the Son of Beast at King's Dominion before I was brought back to corporate. And what I wanted to do was we had this coaster built back in the woods, and we called it the Son of Beast. And I wanted to sell T-shirts and hats that would have underneath on them. I rode the SOB, and then have Son of Beast underneath it. But Paramount wouldn't let Kings Island do that.
Probably a smart, savvy merchandise move on their part.
Well, I mean, but
No offense.
I think it was wrong, really, because I think they would have sold tens of millions of hats and T-shirts with "I rode the SOB." I think everybody in the world would have wanted one.
I
But
love
that's
that.
kind of how that came about. And I took that name up to Kings Island. Said, we were going to call this at Kings Dominion. They said we love it, and that's kind of how it came about.
I love that. That is fantastic. Um, I will throw another real quick promo for the documentary again. Very local, the streaming service. The documentary is called "The Roller Coaster Wars That Birthed the Beast." So be sure to check that out. Anywhere you can find the streaming service, it's on uh, mobile, tablet, connected TV devices, including Amazon Fire TV and Roku. So be sure to check that out. We've watched it. It is a definitely an interesting story.
Well
Definitely,
done. It's well
def-
done.
definitely worth checking out. Um, Dennis, before we wrap this up, I want to get a little bit of a rapid fire going right now.
Okay.
So when you go to Kings Island and as a guest or whatever, even to this day, if it's not a roller coaster, is there another ride that you have to ride every time you go?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to go up the Eiffel Tower and look over and survey the area of Mason Kings Mills. Because keep in mind, when we built Kings Island in 1970, there was nothing north of Fields Erdel Road, which was the demarcation between Hamilton County and Warren County. And to go up and see and look around and see the amazing development that Kings Island spawned. And Kings Island was the spawn or of all of this happening in Mason and Warren County. To see that, and then of course I want to ride the dark rides and I the turnpikes that are still left and things like that. Uh, and I like to. One of the other things I like to do, Andrew, is just go sit on a bench in the park up on International Street, particularly in the afternoon or evening. Watch the fountain, watch the people, and see all the enjoyment of the folks who come to Kings Island. It's one of the few places in the world, a theme park, where you can still go as a family and enjoy it as a family. It's hard to go to a movie with an R or a PG. Dad doesn't want to see a PG, and you can't take the kids to an R. But everybody can go to a theme park and say, hey, go ride your ride. We'll meet back under the Eiffel Tower at noon, have lunch, and then everybody will split off again, and then they'll come back and have their dinner and do some things, see some shows. So, yeah, I like to do that and watch. I like the people watch.
Perfect. And then I've got a this is probably like picking one of your favorite children question. Of the parks that you kind of, again, we're going to specify Kings Dominion, Kings Island, Canada's Wonderland. What do you think is your favorite attraction that you kind of helped with the development and supervision of, and what do you think is the most underrated attraction that you helped with the development and supervision of at those three parks specifically?
Well, we've talked about the Beast, so that would be my number one of the parks.
Fair.
What I miss at the parks today is that Hanna-Barbera influence and how it's changed. I mean, it's Snoopy and it's been Nickelodeon and a lot of different characters like that. I kind of miss that HB when we had they still have the singing mushrooms at King's Dominion, but we had Yogi's Cave and things like that I miss. But when I go into the parks today, and I try to visit them every couple of years and see them, I'm just really amazed at how they have developed. I mean, if you had told me in 1970 there's going to be 18 or 20 roller coasters at Kings Island and 14 or 15 or 16 at Kings Dominion, I went, where are we going to put them? I mean, but to see that kind of growth and to see the maturity of the parks and how beautifully they've been maintained through the years, I think is probably one of the things that I enjoy the most, Andrew.
I love it. Well, Dennis, this has been a blast. And like I said, we're going to have you on again in the future. I've loved the history lesson. I've loved every bit of this. So thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You give me a call anytime and happy to talk to you and hope your listeners enjoy it.
Absolutely. And if you ever make it back down to Carowinds, I know that wasn't, I know Taft brought it, but I'm right here in the Charlotte area. So love to, we'll get some barbecue and reminisce.
It's a deal.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for this week's Coaster 101 podcast. Like I mentioned, the documentary is called The Roller Coaster Wars That Birthed the Beast. That is available on VeryLocal, the VeryLocal app. Mobile, tablet, connected TV devices, included Amazon Fire and Roku. Dennis, again, International Theme Park Services, he hinted at it. He didn't tell us. I didn't even get a wink, wink, nudge, nudge of where this next project's going to be, but they're always on the move. So that's always going to be excited to kind of look forward to. But yeah, if you're listening, make sure you head to coaster101.com if you prefer the written word. If you prefer a little bit more short form content, we're on social media, pretty much anywhere you can find us at Coaster101, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. We're all over the place. If you're listening, make sure you're liking, rating, reviewing, and subscribing, because the more reviews that we get, the bigger the audience gets and the better guests like Dennis that we can get on our show. So again, keep those reviews and everything coming. We really appreciate it. If you're looking for merch, c101.co/tpublic. And last but not least, a huge thank you, as always, to Justin Mabry of JMMD Entertainment for our theme music. Dennis, like I said, we'd love to have you on again.
Yeah, just give me a buzz.
Sounds good. And that's going to do it for this week's show. We will talk to you again soon. See ya.